Hello everybody and welcome back. So today we're talking about the methods used to establish authoritarian states, persuasion and coercion. Just as a refresher, methods is an action committed either by a person or persons as a way to accomplish a goal. In today's video we're talking about two different components here of the same umbrella. So persuasion is the act of convincing someone using positive actions or any sort of means to convince somebody. And coercion is the practice of persuading through violence, through force, through threats. And so we're going to see two very different things here that Mao committed on his path to make sure people will vote for him in power, or that when he gets there, things will really solidify. The two examples we're going to be going over today is Mao's peasant policy and Ku Wongmei, right? That's the journal. So the persuasion is Mao's peasant policy. Just say that explicitly. Mao's peasant policy is persuasion. Do not mix it up. Coercion is going to be that diary you're going to read, Ku Wongmei. And in today's video, I'm not going to be retelling of the diary. I'm not going to be rereading it. More or less, I'm going to be hitting and touching on the key things that are important and how that translates to the bigger scope outside of the diary. So let's go ahead and dig in with Mao's peasant policy. So what was Mao's peasant policy? Well, this is it right here, essentially. It was a quick understanding of anyone who was a part of the CCP had to follow these rules, right? Rule number 1, be courteous and help out when you can. Return all borrowed articles. So you borrowed someone's shoes, you borrowed someone's blanket, return it. Replace all damaged articles, right? If you rip something, fix it. Be honest in all transactions with peasants. So make sure whatever you're doing, that you are treating the peasants as an equal, regardless of your personal social standing. Pay for all articles purchased. So that means if a peasant is going to sell you something and you don't have any money on you, they are going to trust that you are going to pay them back. If not, you're going to get in trouble. The next, be sanitary and establish latrines at a distance from people's homes. This really comes down to, it doesn't matter how you personally feel about the peasants, doesn't matter how you feel or the way they live. You are to set up bathrooms away from their homes. The second to last one is don't take liberties with women. This is essentially don't sexually assault, don't sexually rape, do not abuse your power or your tools like a gun or things like that to force women to do things. And lastly, do not kill any prisoners of war. This, in it of itself, is the nutshell of Mao's peasant policy. But this doesn't become legitimate until Mao's in power of the Chinese Communist Party. And he gets that power in 1935, at the end of the Long March, when he makes it to Shaanxi and Yan'an. Essentially because of everything that he's been given, because of all of the power and support he's shown, because of the city that he built, because of the hospital, because of everything, he is given the keys to the party. The 28 Bolsheviks are no longer a threat to him. They are no longer someone to deal with. Everyone believes Mao is the man in charge. And so when he took this peasant policy and applied it across the CCP, the way he establishes this is not only to have it posted, not only to give it out to his soldiers, but to give it out to the peasants, to give it out to the people that they are surrounding themselves with. So the peasants knew how they were supposed to be treated by the CCP and to report any issues. Now, the other policy that Mao implemented that he did not write here was, if you notice, the very last one says, don't kill prisoners of war. Pretty self-explanatory. But you know who he's not talking about? He's not talking about Mao's greatest threat to China, which is the landlords. And so what Mao does very, very carefully and very quickly is he uses these policies to persuade the peasants to not only like him, to not only be treated nicely, but to then go out and target any of the landlords to kill them. Once he has all these landlords killed, or kills these landlords in certain areas, he starts establishing larger actions that persuade more and more people to come, right? And what are those? Well, it's these, right? He seizes the land from landlords and he gives it back to the peasants. So he goes in, gets the landlord's name, kills them, and then recuts up all the farmland and gives it to the peasants. And doing so, he's not only a legendary hero who survived onslaught in the Long March, he not only has built hospitals and education centers and a whole underground city, but now he's living and practicing what he preaches. He is giving land to us, which is exactly what he says we're supposed to be doing. Then, once all these peasants now have this land and they are not sure what to do with it or how they're going to live their life, he then creates associations, which means that these peasant associations invite the peasants to learn how to farm, invites the soldiers, the CCP, to go out and help the peasants better their homes, help the peasants better their lives and all this new land they just get. The third point is he creates a program to end usury, which is essentially economic slavery. So he breaks all of the bonds and programs that are holding peasants back in terms of like owing a landlord money. So if a landlord decides to save his life and says, you know what, I'm just going to give the peasants my land, he can then also say, but you still owe me all of this money. And Mao comes in and says, I could kill you and you never get that money, or you never get that money and you walk away with your life. And the last two we've talked about pretty extensively so far, literacy and education. So Mao's policy not only keeps the soldiers in line, gives the peasants everything that Mao says he's going to give them, gives them additional things they didn't know they were going to get, but also turns Mao into this, like, not only the godlike figure that they've been hearing stories about, but a man of the actual people. A man who didn't just come from the peasant class, didn't just live it, but now is actively trying to fix it. Which is everything the nationalist government was not doing. The nationalist government was doing everything in their power to make life worse for the peasants because of the war that was occurring. And so the longer Mao was able to survive, the longer the CCP was able to grow, more and more peasants joined him. Now, this persuasion worked very well, because if you give somebody everything they could possibly ever dream of, and things that they didn't think they would ever get, like education, like land, like these things that were essentially the basic needs, you're going to be right. You're going to have a dedicated voter, a dedicated supporter for life. So Mao, in this peasant policy, is essentially ensuring that when he comes to power, or when the Chinese Civil War breaks out again, that he's going to have double or triple the amount of soldiers he ever had at the beginning. Now, there is another edge to this, because as you saw in his persuasion of peasants, he kills a bunch of landlords. He does these things like that. And that's where coercion comes in. As we read in Ku Wongmei's diary, there was a lot of horrible things that were done, or that Ku witnessed. He saw intensive torture and desensitization of that torture by his fellow soldiers. And that was Mao's coercion. Mao's coercion was essentially a full bombardment of emotional abuse, where he would force soldiers to go out, as you see in this picture, listen to the peasants and listen to what was done to them by the nationalists, listen to the life they've heard, and essentially force people to sit and hear the horrific things that have been done to other people constantly, and twist them and manipulate them by saying, you see what happened when we weren't here? This is why we need to spread. This is why we need to do this. And if that didn't get you to stay in line, then he physically assaulted you. He'd have people beat you up. He'd have peasants beat you up. He would have you run and exercise until you were nearly collapsing. That if you weren't going to stick around for the emotional bit, you're going to be physically abused and assaulted. And if that wasn't the case, that's where you saw Ku Wongmei's diary. In his diary, that coercion was psychological. That coercion was, watch what I can do to people who have supported me from the beginning. Do not think of yourself ever as being safe. Do not ever think of yourself as being secure. I will get you if I need to get you. If I feel like you're not stepping up to what I want you to, you're going to suffer the same things that man suffered. And socially, as you saw when Ku couldn't take it anymore and ran out the room, when his fellow peer came out, he told him a revolution is not like a tea party. Mao manipulated and ensured that people were so emotionally, physically, and psychologically abused that coercion was commonplace. That if in normal conversation you were always reminded of the emotional, physical, and psychological coercion that supporting Mao would, quote unquote, save you from if you did what Mao was telling you to do.